When I read Rebecca Clifford's Survivors, I was really struck by how much I didn't know before reading it about the idea of childhood, about the experience, the range of experience that children who were survivors of the Holocaust had, and the impact of those children's experience on the development of ideas about child psychology, ideas about child psychology and the field of child psychology. Rebecca Clifford's Survivors is both a social history of children who endured the Holocaust and what happened to them afterwards, but it's also a history of the profession of psychology.
Well, there is, of course, a vast literature on the Holocaust and its impact on all sorts of people and societies in Europe, in the United States, etc. I think what she does is to really enable us to question some of the assumptions that we have developed out of previous literature, out of the oral histories, out of the remembrances. I mean, it's a study both of history and of memory at the same time, particularly through these children who are survivors of the Holocaust.
It is very important that history shouldn't just be seen as a history of men and politics. In fact, when I started doing history myself, I in fact gave up history when I was 14 on the grounds that it was all about wars and battles and politics. And this is a kind of history that I felt was a history that would tell me about the life of my mother and grandmother. It's a real history of the things that mattered. So the history of how people thought about children in the 20th century. And that's something that's really important in everyday lives, how they thought that children would deal with the things that happened in their early childhood and how their ideas about that changed and how they changed in response to the Holocaust and in response to their understandings of what had happened to these survivors.
This is a book that takes a huge subject, a subject about which there's been an enormous amount of writing by historians and others, and it still manages to say something new about that subject. It brings us an entirely new angle for thinking about the Holocaust, and it does so in a way that is beautifully evidenced and documented, but also beautifully expressed and written. It takes us along, and as it takes us along the stories of these different lives, it shows us a new way of thinking about that history. And I think that's what some of the most powerful history writing can do for us. Gives us stories to follow, but stories which open up big questions about the past and make us understand that in a new way.